And I actually think that, so listening leads to learning. And I think that learning becomes the main differentiating factor between you as a professional and other professionals, between your organization and other organization. And our next speaker, Trevor, is actually an expert of the learning environment. And also, for those that may not know, and this is according to his words, the Rudy of Duke's basketball team without the storybook ending. So, graduating from a bachelor's in sociology from Duke University, Trevor has taken a path different than most. Actually, and he doesn't know this, I've observed Trevor's path from afar for the last 5 or 6 years, as I loved one of his core ideas that you should practice ugly. And he believes in it so much that it became the name of his blog, Train Ugly. Running with it, Trevor has then founded the basketball school and the Learner Lab. Through these companies, he has delivered workshops for well-known companies, you could say, like Microsoft, Ferrari, the World Bank, and UCLA football. He now divides his time into three buckets: learning about learning, producing content about learning, and facilitating learning workshops. Notice how I said learning 4 times here? That's his MO. Please join me in welcoming Trevor Ragan. Trevor, welcome to Timeout.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this. Basically, it's been a 10-year journey in the learning world. And I would say there's a few things we know for sure. First, learning is a skill, which means it's something that anyone can get better at. I also truly believe that it's one of the most important skills. I think it's the key skill. If you become a better learner, you can trade that in for additional skills. I think that's the pathway to becoming more resilient, more adaptable. Great learners, I think, have an advantage in any industry. Which brings us to the final layer, which is, well, okay, it's a skill and it matters. How do you get better at it? And that's what I've spent most of my time on. How do we become better learners? Truth is, I could give like a 5-hour workshop on all the stuff that we've learned. And most of our content is focused on the individual. How do we get better at getting better? But over the last year, I've been looking at it through a different angle, which is, how do we become better leaders? How do we create a better learning environment for the people around us? And so in pursuing that question, I discovered the research of a guy named Dr. Robert Rosenthal. He's one of the 100 most cited psychology researchers to ever live. He's almost 90 years old, and he's still a professor and still doing research at UC Riverside. November 2019, I flew to California and spent the day with him, and it was one of the coolest days of my life. And I want to take you through how he explained his research to me and why I think it matters so much. So he spent most of his career focusing on a topic they call the Pygmalion Effect. He's done so much work in the field that actually some people now just call it the Rosenthal effect. So I'm sitting in his small office, and the first question I asked him is the question that's on your mind right now. What's the Pygmalion effect and why does it matter to me? And he goes, well, the first study we did was in 1958 with rats. So he goes, okay, we have this lab. We run a lot of experiments with rats. And one night, he sneaks into the lab and all these rats are in cages. And he puts little labels on half of the cages that say smart rat. The other half of the cages he labeled dumb rat. He like actually put the label on the cages. Then a group of students comes in for a couple weeks and they care for the rats. They feed them and take care of them. At the end of a couple weeks, they run the rats through a maze. And what happened was weird. The smart rats ran through the maze better and faster than the dumb rats. What in the world is that? Like, what sort of witchcraft is this? Now, one thing I forgot to tell you, the rats in this study, they couldn't read. So this wasn't about like their confidence and their mindset of like, oh, I'm a smart rat and that helps me run through the maze faster. Or, oh, I'm a dumb rat and that hurts me. Of course not. But someone in the study could read, and that was the students. What they discovered, the essence of the Pygmalion effect, is the label or expectation of the leader can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The label or expectation of the leader can become true. And that's exactly what happened. Like, the smart rats actually did run through the maze better and faster. It wasn't like they manipulated the data. But the key thing to understand is the smart rats ran through the maze better and faster because the students treated them differently. When they analyzed the data, they found, wow, the students would actually handle the smart rats with more care. They'd feed them a little bit more. And it was the extra care, the extra support that allowed them to run through the maze faster. The smart rats did better because the students treated them differently. They treated them differently because of the label on their cage. So Rosenthal publishes this first study, and they publish it in a national journal. And the last sentence of his article, he goes, if this happens to rats, I wonder what happens to students. So a principal from San Francisco, she reads the study and reaches out to Rosenthal and goes, wow, like, this is incredible. Could you come do this research at my school? So he goes out to the school in San Francisco, and the only one in on the joke is the principal. They round up the teachers, and he does like a presentation. He goes, at my lab, we've developed a better IQ test, and our test is better because we can identify academic bloomers. Maybe not the students with the highest scores now, but the ones that will make the biggest leap in a year. So they give all these students this exam. They process all the results. They give the school a list of like 20 names. Here are your bloomers. Again, maybe not the ones with the best scores, but the ones that will make the most progress. Gives them 20 names. He goes back to the school 1 year later, and they give the same students the same exam. The students on the list of 20, their scores go up 27 points on average. The students not on the list, their scores go up 12 points. So the bloomers more than doubled the progress of the other students. So the teachers are amazed. They're like, wow, like, what characteristics do you test for? How do you identify a bloomer? And you know exactly where I'm headed. He goes, I just gave you 20 random names. Now, just like in the rat study, the students weren't aware of the label, but the teachers were. And just like in the rat study, the label becomes true because it changed the way the teachers treated the students. When they, again, looked at the data, they found the teachers would actually treat the bloomers a bit better. They would teach them more and more difficult material. That was not the case for the other students. And just like in the rat study, the label becomes true with the extra support, with the extra reps. Of course, the bloomers are going to do better. So one thing I want to be clear on here is it's not like he did a study with rats and a study with students and called it a day. At the time of the interview, he told me they've done like 500 variations of this study. They've looked in military, in the corporate world, in education. They've looked at skills of all shapes and sizes, and time again, they see the label or expectation of the leader can become a self-fulfilling prophecy because the label or expectation can change the way we treat the subject. Now, that's the tricky part of the Pygmalion effect, is our original label or expectation is likely to become true. So we feel like we're right. It's like, yep, that student bloomed and that student didn't. But what we don't realize is we have more of an effect on that than we think. So after he taught me this and I started to understand the Pygmalion effect, you start to witness it everywhere. Once you understand, oh, how labels and expectations can become self-fulfilling prophecies, you see it everywhere. In the basketball world, a common label that we have as coaches is like, oh, tall people can't dribble. And if you look around, a lot of tall people have trouble dribbling, but it's not because there's some law of physics that's like, oh, if you're 6 feet 5 inches, you can't do this. The problem is it's the Pygmalion effect at play. Because we believe that most tall people can't dribble, most coaches, starting at like a really young age in the world of basketball, were limiting the reps of taller people. And without the reps, without the engagement, of course, most tall people are going to struggle with ball handling. And I could go through 1,000 more examples of the Pygmalion effect at play. And I think everyone in the audience, whether you're in the sports world or not, no matter what sport we operate in, we see the Pygmalion effect at play. Now, I believe that the Pygmalion effect is even more powerful in the real world than the lab, which is kind of different. Usually we see big results in the lab and maybe they're smaller in the real world. I think it's flipped for the Pygmalion effect. And I think there's 2 reasons for it. First, when they do research like this, they never give a negative label to a human. Now, in the rat study, they had a positive and negative label, smart and dumb. But when they work with humans, it's only a positive label or nothing, bloomer or nothing. Well, if you think for 5 seconds, you realize we give both positive and negative labels in the real world. It's like, you are a math person, you're not a math person. You are a leader, you're not a leader. And with both the positive and negative label, we're going to see even more of a powerful Pygmalion effect, both positive and negative. When they do this research, they never tell the label to the subject. They never tell the students that they're a bloomer. In the real world, we do. I might believe that maybe you're not cut out to be a leader, and I'm probably going to tell you that. And when we tell the label to the subject, it becomes a double-edged sword. If you look into the research, and we spend a lot of time on growth mindset research, what we see is like, if deep down I don't believe I can learn something, I'm really not going to engage with that type of action. In a way, I kind of rob myself of reps. The Pygmalion effect is the other side. If you believe that I'm not cut out to be a leader and you tell me it, I'm probably going to avoid leadership experience. And if deep down you believe that about me, you're probably going to like steer me away from leadership experience. So I'm robbing myself of reps. You're robbing me of reps. It's going to be really hard for me to become a better leader. So what do we do? And this was the question I was most excited to ask Rosenthal. Going into the interview, I thought I had that answer. I was like, oh, the label, the expectation becomes true. Seems like a straightforward application to me. We should just set really high expectations and then they become true. Everyone in my math class can get 100%. Everyone on the basketball team could shoot 40% from 3, and everyone can bat 300 on our team. We set the high expectation, it becomes true. And I said that out loud to Rosenthal in the interview, and he just kind of shakes his head and laughs at me. He's like, that's not how you should apply this research. Because the truth is this, in any group, in and out of sports, everyone's different. And just because you provide equal opportunities and support, very rarely do you see equal outcomes across the board. Some students are going to be better at math than others. Some are going to have a better batting average than others. So he goes, in applying this work, don't attach an outcome to the label. The label we should use is learner. It is the most important word ever. That word holds us accountable. If deep down, I believe that the people around me are learners, that might be one of the biggest shifts and adjustments we could make to improve the learning environment. Because if I believe you're a learner, no longer can I put you in a box and tell you that you can't do something, you can't learn something, that you're not cut out to be a leader, that you could never learn this new position. Now, treating someone as a learner doesn't mean I'm fake. It doesn't mean I tell you, hey, you're the best leader in the group if deep down you're not. Treating someone as a learner is saying, look, you know and I know that leadership might not be your strongest skill, but skills are built, not born. And it's going to take some time and some struggle and some experiments and some practice. But if you engage in that, you can become a better leader because it's a skill. And I'm here to help you do that. That's 1,000 times more effective than putting someone in a box and telling them that they can't learn something. Learner is the most important word ever. So my challenge to you, before we deliver feedback, praise, or even a critique, stop for 2 seconds and use that as a filter. How would I deliver this material to a learner? You might be better at math than me, but we can both get better at math. You might be able to hit a curveball a little bit better than me, but we can both get better at hitting a curve because we're both learners. So whether we're working with high performers or maybe some people struggling with the skill, it's funneling back to the same word, learner. We need to believe in our people's capacity to grow and then treat them accordingly. And I think the coolest part about that word and this research is that it's grounded in the science. I have one quick video I'd love to show you.
Michael Merzenich, or Mike, you can call me. And I was for many years a professor at the University of California at San Francisco. And we did experiments. Other scientists had also done experiments earlier and in parallel that showed that the brain, in fact, was massively plastic at an older age, at any age, on any ability. And I could improve it. It turns out that plasticity in the brain is its big trick. It's the main thing that makes it so fabulous. Absolutely, everyone has the capacity to be better at virtually everything. With that understanding, miracles can occur in your capacity to understand or do complicated things that you never thought you'd be able to do. You are designed to be continuously improvable. Nobody's done. Nobody's defined what their limits are. I can tell you whatever you think your limits are, you're wrong.
Right.
You can be better next week, a little bit, but in a year you can be a lot better at almost anything that matters to you.
That's like my favorite video ever, because that's not some celebrity trying to sell us something on Instagram. That is a neuroscientist that's been studying brains since 1971. And for someone from that field to be that definitive, I think it carries a ton of weight. Absolutely everyone can get better at virtually anything. So whether we're talking about the individual or the leader, it's all about that one word. We need to believe that we're learners. We need to believe the people around us are learners. Now, I've delivered this to a Major League Baseball team, actually, same topic, and a Division I college football team. And the one little part that they struggled with, they're like, well, in the sports world, we have all sorts of labels about like our positions and our strengths and weaknesses. It's like, oh, my left fielder has great range, but can't hit a curve. Do we need to abandon all labels? Of course not. Of course not. There's labels in all sorts of industries. My advice, attach the label learner on top. My left fielder has great range, can't really hit a curve, but my left fielder can improve their range and get better at hitting a curve because my left fielder is a learner. So we attach that word on top of our positions, our strengths and weaknesses. And of course, I'm not saying that we're going to go from I can't hit a curveball at all to I'm the best on the team at hitting a curve. Of course not. It's a progression, but I can get much better than you realize and I realize probably. And so the goal, the first step is to help us understand we all have a huge capacity to grow, much greater than we know. All right, we're going to do some questions. And one thing I'm going to pop in the chat real quick before I fit. I built a private page on our website for everyone in the audience. I'm putting it in the chat. You can go there. There's links to our podcast, our best videos, articles, suggested reading, and my contact information. So if you don't get your question answered right now, you can email me. My phone number and email are on the hub. I'm putting it in the chat now. Let's do some questions.
Thank you, Trevor. I mean, if I can put a label on you, you're such a compelling speaker, and thank you for participating to the event. One thing I'd like to ask you, coming from Joanne, it's not so much about, the learning and the principles you talked about over the last 15 minutes, but how did you actually decide to use this unique title, Train Ugly?
Yeah, so that was like the original name of the website, and it's a good name for that piece of the learning equation. It's basically saying, look, the best type of practice involves a bit of challenge, involves a bit of struggle, and that can get messy, but that it's okay. It's like, think of any time you've learned anything, you struggled. And so it was a call to action to remind people that it's okay to struggle. Now, I like the name Learner Lab better because that's like the overarching topic that we're fascinated in. And Train Ugly is a pillar of becoming a better learner, but it's not the whole equation. But it's just a good call to action of like, hey, to get good, you got to be willing to struggle a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. And building on that, I was a football coach for a few years in Canada, and I know some coaches I work with, what they want to have on Thursday, we play on Saturday. They want to have great Thursday practices, perfect Thursday practices. What would you say to those coaches? Like, is it okay to think that they should have perfect practices, or they should maybe change or see things differently?
Yeah. This isn't an all or nothing type of thing. And I could see some people in the chat having trouble with the link I sent. It's probably because 300 of you are going to my website at once. It will eventually work, I promise. Like, it's not all or nothing. It's like every once in a while in a practice, we need to go slow and it needs to look good and we're prepping for the game and we're avoiding injuries. Great. But what we know is when our practice, if we're really trying to get the most out of it, the more that it resembles the game, the better. The way we think about it is this: in any sport, if we're talking about baseball, basketball, football, anything, the game is like the jungle. It's chaotic, it's wild, it's random, it's unpredictable. The problem is a lot of times we practice in the zoo. And so we were going to make our practice really perfect and absent of challenge and absent of obstacles. So we're training you as a zoo tiger, and then we throw you out into the jungle and go, good luck. And that's why we see like, oh, wow, we could do that really well on Wednesday, but it's not showing up Friday. It's because we're training in the zoo when we need to compete in the jungle. And so the way to use that framework would be, well, if I wanted to be able to thrive in the jungle, I need to get used to it. And so how do I incorporate variables that I might see in the game and build them into my practice? Now, again, it's never going to be perfect, but you don't have to be a rocket science to figure that out. My grandma could figure that out. I call my grandma right now and say, hey, I want to get better at public speaking. Should I just stay alone in my house and give my talk to the mirror? And she'd say, no. And then I'd say, Grandma, what should I do? She'd say, you should probably give your talk to people. Boom. That's training in the jungle. So I don't want to overcomplicate this, but it's about being willing to identify variables we're going to see when we compete and start to weave those into our practice. And when we do that, we're going to see more transfer from practice to game.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what you're saying there speaks to me in the sense that we try to put things in such a controlled environment at times in practice, whereas the games, they can't be controlled. You don't know what's going to be coming up from the other team, what plays they're going to run, what type of blitzes they're going to send. So, and I think that's important, and that's the point you touched on. Any last words? We have to move on. Unfortunately, it's super compelling what you've been sharing with us today. Any last words before I will let you go?
Nothing here. If anyone needs anything, check out that link, shoot me an email. It's been an honor to be a part of this event. I've been watching some of the speakers. I'm having a blast right now. Thank you, everybody.
And thanks to you, Trevor. And I mean, I've been a big fan of his work for a while. And I mean, the content he puts online is a great way to vulgarize the science that we have about learning. And to have done some work myself in that area, I can tell you that it's a good way to articulate it. And at times it's quite nice to have access to information like that, but in a way that's digestible and we can apply rapidly in our field. So please join me in thanking Trevor for his time. Thank you, Trevor.